Hello and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm privileged each week on Tuesdays and Fridays to join you in this studio where we interview some of the world's most renowned thought leaders, authors, speakers, coaches, mentors, academics, researchers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, you name it. Sometimes they are authors, sometimes they are not. What they have in common is an abundance mentality, a desire to invest in you, our listeners and viewers around the world, to go achieve your great purposes. Franklin Covey's mission is to inspire greatness in people and organizations everywhere. Honored to have a 3-decade association with the Franklin Covey Company. Dr. Covey, of course, is the co-founder of our firm. He wrote the book, the incomparable book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that has now launched Franklin Covey into the most trusted leadership firm around the world. We work weekly with organizations of all different sizes, helping them build great cultures, develop great leaders, to execute with discipline on their top priorities. And to do that, you, of course, have to have highly effective colleagues, individual contributors, which is why we have invited today's guest on the podcast to really help build a sense of self, to validate your inner voice, to tell yourself the right story and perhaps break patterns of narratives that were maybe foisted upon you by less effective parents or caregivers, or in some of our cases, early leaders that decided not to believe in us more than we believed in ourselves. We'll talk about that and other things as we discuss the new book, Keep Telling Yourself, by Chad Sanschagrin, who's joining us outside of a balmy Baltimore day. Chad, welcome to On Leadership.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me. I can't even believe I'm sitting here having this podcast interview with you. Like, it's actually happening is a cannonball moment for me.
Well, you and I share something in common. I'm honored to interview you today because I like to associate with people that are energy infusers, which you are, and that people that see and believe in people more than they do themselves. And you've written this new masterpiece published by Ben Bella, Matt Holt Books, called Keep Telling Yourself, Shift Your Story, and Create a Life of Abundance. Now, Chad, you are not the first author to ever write a book about owning your story. But I love your authenticity and your brutal vulnerability about how you have shifted your own story. And so today we're going to talk a lot about how people create their own stories, how they co-opt, how they change the narrative, their circumstance even, that may have actually set them in their story. Before we get into the book, would you rewind a couple of decades? And I'd love to have you reintroduce yourself to all of our listeners and viewers around the world, because although you are on the cusp of becoming a well-known author and thought leader, there might be the odd person around the world that hasn't yet had a chance to experience you. Chad, rewind. You were born where, and then what happened?
Yeah, born into a very large family in Long Island, New York. So I still have that New York accent. But at the age of 5, my parents divorced, and I was raised by a single mother, which started the narrative. That started a narrative of basically victimhood. I was less than because I had no father. Moved to Maryland, where I did poorly in every possible aspect of my life. I did poorly in school. I did poorly in relationships. I did poorly in jobs. Graduated high school with a 1.6 grade point average, never went to college, had a shift moment, and shift, I believe, stands for see how I find truth, a see how I find truth moment, when meeting my now wife, and started the premise of changing my narrative. And now I own one of the largest corporate performance companies in the country. I have an amazing wife, as I just mentioned. I have 2 beautiful kids, and I have a life of abundance, and I'm on this mission to continue to grow that. And I mean abundance of all things, health and love and spirituality and things that matter to me. And so I'm a work in progress, but it was not always an easy path.
Oh, this is going to be good. Hold on, everybody. You want to check in and clear your schedule for the next 35 minutes, because this is going to be a great conversation. Let's start with this idea of a shift moment. I'd like you to slow down a little bit and maybe belabor this. You use it as an acronym. But I want you to educate people on what is a shift moment, how do we know when we're having one, how do we know if we had one that we didn't name or leverage, and how do you see one coming? I'd like you to take a few moments on this idea, because this is a unique idea that comes from you. You talk about it in your book. Riff on that.
Yeah, I don't want to. My book is not a book of faith, but I am a man of faith, and so I think there's a spirituality behind everything I do. So I think God gives us these moments where we can see clearly, where we're not a victim of the circumstance. We're part of the solution of the narrative of what we want in our life. And so there's these moments, and I'll give you an example of what I mean when I say see how I find truth. I said I graduated high school with a 1.6 grade point average, and I can guarantee you that was generous in all aspects. I never studied, I never read. I was 25 when I read my first book. And I was surrounded by people that would say, hey, you should read more. If you read more, you'll invest in yourself. If you believe in yourself. But the challenge is I found truth in these stories and these narratives that created me as the victim, that I was somehow born broken, that my circumstance made me broken, and that I was less than. And I didn't want to change. I didn't believe change was even possible. When you're unconsciously ignorant to what the possibilities are, you live in your own bubble of victimhood, and that was me. And so these shift moments would happen. I would have a great teacher, and I remember one teacher said, Chad, if you just believe in yourself, and she invested in me, but I was not willing to hear it. My story of victimhood was more powerful than her story of victorhood for me. And so every once in a while, if you're not ready for it, they'll just pass you by. Well, there was a situation where, I'll give you a real life example, where I went on a date with this girl. I was in my early 20s. All I cared about was drinking and partying, and, because there was nothing good for me on the other side of anything in my life. And so I go on a date with this girl. Get there, the date was horrible. It was awful. It was the worst date of my life. And all I could do couldn't wait to get back to the bar that night. So the date lasted like 30 or 40 minutes. I say I'm going to call the girl. I never call the girl. I blow her off. I go back to drinking and living this victim life. 3 months later, I see her in a bar. I don't even remember her. And she comes up to me, and I said, hey, how are you? She said, good. I said, how was your summer? She said, let me tell you the highlight of the summer. I went on a date with this guy. He said he was going to call, and he never called. And I realized where I knew her from at that point. And I believe God allowed time to just slow down and allowed me to understand the severity of this moment. This was an opportunity. And this was a shift moment where I realized the reason that first date was so bad was because she was out of my league. She was too pretty, she was too smart, she was too educated, she was too driven, and I just didn't stack up. And so that shift moment is where time slows down, where you really start to question your stories and what your truth you believe, what is the real truth. And so for me, these happen all the time, but you have to be ready to adopt them. You have to be ready to see them. And I was too blind not to see them. And so I found truth in a different narrative. I found truth in the narrative that I wasn't born broken, that I just had broken stories. I wasn't born less than. I just believed I was less than. I had bad circumstances, bad situations. And so I think that's where most people, they only change for one or two reasons, desperation or inspiration. And I think I was so desperate and so inspired at the same time that shift moment happened. And there's been 5 or 6 major shift moments in my life since then. And now I'm ready for them. Now I'm ready to ask myself, what does this moment mean? And what am I finding truth in? And is it serving me at my highest level?
Chad, as an author and a speaker and a consultant, you have an answer for this. And I recognize you're not a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, but how does someone differentiate like a life lesson from a shift moment? I'm interested in myself as well, too. I have a busy schedule, own a few companies, write books and podcasts like you do. You and I have somewhat parallel lives. Yeah. You're better looking than I am. Your hands are large. Holy mackerel. Like you have like hands like my father. You have like football player hands or basketball player hands.
Enormous.
How does someone differentiate between something that they should pay attention to as a shift moment versus something else that kind of catches their attention?
Yeah, I think for me, the quality of your life is predicated on the questions you ask yourself. I think that if you ask yourself great questions, you'll have a pretty great life. If you ask yourself questions of victimhood, you'll have a pretty victimhood life. And so in this moment, I think that the key to everything is questioning it. And when something happens and you understand that this is something that is unusual to you, puts you in that state of discomfort, well, the first thing you want to do is question it. And if you can question it, and you go deep enough into the questions, you'll start to reveal what the moment is supposed to, what it means to you. I think there's a lot of faith in that. I think, for me, it's what is God trying to present to me in this moment? I think there's times where I'd say, all right, well, this is just a moment. It's not a life-defining moment. As I research it, I'm not too emotionally invested in the outcome of it. And then there's other things where, like that moment standing in the bar, and in that moment at the bar, when I question it, I said to myself, what is the reason? And I didn't know all of this back then. This is easy to Monday morning quarterback. At that moment, I said to myself, what was the reason that date was so bad? Well, here's because she's out of my league. And then, well, what's the reason she's out of your league? Is she really out of your league? And I think the challenge is that most people live this life based on their stories, but they never fact check their stories. They just believe that their stories are true. And, just because it's true to you doesn't actually make it true. And so just because I believed that I was less than didn't actually make it true that I was less than. And so I think in those moments when you have these moments, what we call shift, or the moment that you just talked about, just a thing that happens, I think the first thing you want to do is question it. I think the questions are the key to everything you want on the other side, everything good you want in your life.
Chad, a concept that I'm a little bit obsessed with right now is this idea of owning and knowing your origin story. It's the focus of your second chapter in the book. Yeah. I'm actually working with an author on a book. They're writing about origin story and understanding when is it your epigenetics, when is it just your parenting upbringing. And you open this chapter with a great thought. You say, start at the beginning. Is your story about what happened to you or about what you are becoming? Everybody can relate to this, and everybody is sort of on this continuum of, am I still attached to what happened to me, or am I focused on what and who am I becoming? Yeah. What would you say to someone who hasn't yet had that shift moment to move from my circumstance, my victimhood? No one wants to be thought of as a victim, but we all have some level of victimhood in us. Yep. How does someone springboard from what happened to me to what I am becoming?
Yeah, really, really, really great question. I think part of it for me, when I talk about, shifting your origin story, first is questioning your origin story. One of my favorite books ever is a book by a lady named Byron Katie called Loving What Is. And Loving What Is talks about, the questions you ask yourself. And I think the challenge is when you have an origin story, you have this origin story, we have to question the origin story. And we talk about this in the book, is this origin story serving you? Is it true? Is it serving you? Who would you be without this story? And for me, it was like, if I didn't have this story of, that I was raised by a single mother and that I, had this abusive father who, by the way, in my mind was this abusive, horrible human being, none of it was true. None of it was true. None of what I thought about my father. He was absent after my parents' divorce, but I lived 35 years, 40 years, believing in a story that was not true at all. There was zero truth to the story that I had created in my head. But this 5-year-old kid created a story and it wasn't true. So I think that the idea is the first thing you have to do is question the validity of this story. Is this story even true? And is it serving you? Then once you do that, I think then this idea of becoming, what you're talking about, is I think people spend more time trying to figure out how to upgrade their electronics than they do upgrade their life. How do I become version 2.0? How do I become version 3.0? And for me, that once you realize that your story is no longer serving you, that starts this path towards betterment, starts this path towards upgrading yourself. And if you don't upgrade yourself, what you'll find is that you become obsolete. You become obsolete in your own life. And so for me, I created this story. It wasn't true. I questioned the story. And then I got busy rewriting a new story. And that's the greatest thing in the world. When you realize you're the author of your life, well, then you can write a plot twist in whenever you want. You can change the narrative whenever you want. And so I think the idea is question the story, see if it's serving you. And if it's not, pick up the pen and write a new one.
If you think of a bell curve, it seems to me that oftentimes the most successful people, however you want to define success, fame or wealth or transition or influence, they often lie at one end of a continuum. The one side, perhaps they were raised in significant wealth or fame or had a big head start. They had access, if you will. Or the other side, they had this enormous tragedy where they triumphed and they had a great desire, but they were raised in a circumstance of enormous resistance. Yeah. And then there are the other 60% of us, like Scott Miller's, that were raised in a nice, healthy, middle-class family where we weren't abused, and we had dinner, and we had electricity, and we had comforts, everything we needed, but not much of what we wanted. Yeah. I just described my life. What would you say to that middle 60%? I'm arbitrarily assigning 60%, to say, your origin story isn't one of trauma or triumph early on. I'll bet you there are a lot of people out there like me that are in that kind of safe middle zone that the pain isn't, the pain or the pleasure isn't much to motivate you. What would you say to somebody that is comfortable and not uncomfortable enough, but if they change their story, they could also have enormous success like we find typically at these outlier ends? And you're welcome to disagree with me, by the way, on that.
No, best question I've ever heard. The best question I've ever heard. I've ever heard on any podcast. That is the best question I've ever heard, because I think it's the most factual. Is you have this middle, you have this, what you said, you have this portion down here that had this negative victim story and things that happened to them. You have here that they were born into success, but most people are in the middle. I agree with that. 60, 70% of those people. And I think here's the challenge is most people are blissfully unaware of how much more abundance they can have. And I'm not talking abundance in things. If that's important to you, great. But I'm talking about abundance in all things, abundance in health and love and success. The challenge is complacency, what hurts us. And I think that for me, I have a culture of divine discontent now. Divine discontent. And what I mean by that is that I realize that there is always more. Always more. It doesn't mean I don't have gratitude for what I have today, but I'm obsessed with the next version of me. What can I contribute on the next level? And I think the way to get people out of that bubble is to get them to understand and feel that there's more. I'll give you a really quick example, if you don't mind. When about 10 years ago, my wife and I are going on a trip, and our kids. So we have 2 young kids at that time, and my wife and I are going on a trip. And I travel a ton, I'm sure, just like you. And I get to the airport, and the gate agent says, hey, Mr. Sanschagrin, we're going to upgrade you to first class. And I was like, all right, thank you, I appreciate it. But she said, we only have 1 seat just for you. Unfortunately, we don't have 4 seats. And I said, it's fine. And I look next to my wife. My wife's giving me this look, like this piercing, like eyebrow up look. And the look is like, I'm going to get that ticket. So I look at her, and I was like, what's wrong? And she goes, hey, I'll take that ticket. And I said, I can't give you this ticket. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, you never have flown first class. And she said, I'm aware. And I said, no, if I give you this ticket, you're always going to want to fly first class, because right now, sitting center seat coach, having stale peanuts and stale pretzels, you think that's good. If you fly first class, you're always going to want it. It's better that you be blissfully unaware, because we are not first class people, we are coach people. And she said, I'll manage. That was 10 years ago. Well, eventually, they fast forward during that day, I give her the first class ticket. 10 years later, every time we fly, she's asking if we're going to fly first class. And the reason I tell you that story is because once people get a taste of what true fulfillment looks like and true happiness looks like, and get out of that comfort zone of what's actually capable for them, well, now they get into this place of suffering, self-suffering. And what I mean by that is self-suffering for me is when you know what you're capable of and you settle for less. The delta in between what you're capable of and what you're settling for is what causes a lot of that intrinsic motivation to strive for more. And so for me, because I came from such bad mindset narratives and life of like lack, now that I have more, now I'm obsessed with the fact that, maybe there's a better version of me. Maybe I can be a better speaker. Maybe I can be maybe the 1.6 grade point average guy can write a book. And so for me, once people realize they have this unlimited potential in them, but they have to be willing to leave the comfort of what they have to get it, I think until they taste it, they're never going to want to leave it.
Chad, your book is titled Keep Telling Yourself. Shift your story and create a life of abundance. My favorite chapter in the book is actually chapter 3, because it's the theme is themes. In the question you ask, I love how your book is laid out. The book is laid out, listen, I read a lot of books, and I actually have written a few books. You have written this book with the reader in mind, how you laid it out, how you orchestrated it, how you've organized it. In the beginning of every chapter, you kind of share a bit of a provocative question, a rhetorical question. I love that because it sets my mind for what to expect. In this particular chapter, you call it Become the Author. You find what you focus on. But more importantly, you ask this question, what are the themes of your story? The themes of your life? This could include a lot of things. Mistakes, successes, habits, mindsets, repetition, your brand, your reputation. And I really got to writing down my list of the themes in life and which ones that I want to repeat, which ones that I want to break out of. It was fascinating how many of them were self-imposed, self-limiting. I was responsible for all of them. None of them were circumstance-based given to me. Riff on this idea about the value people can take if they want to rewrite their story of teasing out the themes of their life.
Yeah. This is what's interesting is chapter 3 is my favorite chapter in the book as well, because I think as I said, your life is made up of these stories. Well, what are the themes of your story? Are your themes of your story that I'm just not capable of? And to your point, almost all of our limits are self put on. Like we create our own limits. We create these ceilings in our life and say, this is as high as I can go. Well, the idea is which ones are serving you, and you find what you focus on. I gave my kids, I talk about this in the book, I gave my kids 2 books, probably 3 or 4 years ago, 2 notebooks at Christmas. I gave them a red notebook and a blue notebook each. And they were both empty. And I gave them the red notebook and I said, listen, I want you to go through the day, and any act of service, any act of love, any act of caring, any act of gratitude, what you see, I want you to write it in this book. I want you to keep this journal for 1 year. The blue book, I want you to do the same thing, but I want you to take note of and journal everything you see, every disservice, every act of violence, every act of shame. I want you to write it in this book. And so I said, you have 2 notebooks. And then I asked them both a question. I have identical twin daughters. I said, which book do you think at the end of the year will be more full? Which book will you fill first? And one of my daughters said, oh, the red book, absolutely the red book. And another daughter said, no, you're absolutely wrong. You'll fill the blue book first. And they said, Dad, what do you think? And I said, you'll fill whatever notebook you take out of your book bag that day. Because in life, you find what you focus on. So if you're looking for acts of love and kindness and gratitude and service and Christianity, you'll see it. If you look for all the evil in the world, you'll see it. Because in life, you find what you focus on. And I think the problem is people have these themes in their life. And if you have a theme of I'm less than, that I'm not enough, if you have themes of, the world is against me, if you have themes of paranoia, well, you'll find every supporting reason to make that true. That's the way your brain works. That's as much biology as it is psychology. And you'll find what you focus on. But the idea is, are these themes serving you? So now the theme of my life is abundance. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have bad days. It doesn't mean that I don't sometimes veer off and find the wrong things. But I understand that I decide what I see in the world. And I decide the perspective I have on the world around me. And for me, if I can live this life and I can create this life, I'm telling you, while it's hard, it's not impossible. And so the theme of, are you going to be the victor in your story, or you're going to be the victim? The challenge is most people in this world are led to believe and created to be the supporting cast. Most people aren't even the lead actors in their own movie. And so their themes are, it's all about everybody else. It's all about everybody else. And the reality is, in order to be selfless, you have to be selfish, and you have to put yourself first, and that has to be the theme of your life. I'm going to put myself first so that I can show up fully for my friends and my family, my clients, and my loved ones. Because if I'm not showing up fully for myself, there's no way I can show up fully for them.
Chad, my sense is from reading your book, this was not the theme of your early life and upbringing from your parents. What, who, when, where was this flame ignited in you? Was there a person? Was there a circumstance that someone ignited in you the contagious, passionate, positive influencer you have become?
Yes, yes, yes. The answer is yes, and the easy answer is to say my wife, my now wife, after 25 years. My wife was going to school to be a doctor and a lawyer. She was getting her PhD in psychology and her law degree at the same time at 2 different universities. And, here I am dating this woman that I blew off for one date, and then we go out and we start dating. And the thing about my wife was she never told me that I needed to be better. She never told me to do better. She never expected me to change. She just loved me unconditionally for who I was. But being around her made me want to change. Being around her made me want to start investing in myself. And, the greatest thing a human being can learn is cause and effect behavior. And I started to understand the cause and effect is when I read, I got better. When I believed in myself, I got better. And so it started, that was the ignition. But the flame, the gasoline was not poured on it until I had children. And, I don't think I ever actually understood what fear meant until I became a father. And what I mean by that is I became hyper afraid of everything. Of, are my decisions going to allow me to be the best father I can be? That's the only thing I ever knew I wanted in my life was to be a father. When I was 17 years old, I can exactly remember where I was. I said, I'm going to be the world's, I didn't even have a girlfriend, but I just wanted to be a father. And so when my kids were born, that was gasoline on this idea of I have to figure out how do I become the best person I can become for my daughters? How do I become somebody that they look up to, that they want to take coaching from, that they want to do things with, that they want to learn from? And so for me, it was about getting myself right. The minute I found out, I used to be a smoker, and the day I found out that my wife was pregnant, I threw the cigarettes in the trash and never smoked again. I started running marathons. I've run 54, 55 marathons in the last 7 years. I've invested in my health. I've invested in everything because I now know in order for me to be the father I want to be, the husband I want to be, I had to be the best I could be, as corny as that sounds. And I'm on version 10.0 of me as a human being, but it all started in that moment of understanding. I was so afraid of being my father to my children, and the seed of the father is planted within every son, and that motivated me once I became a father to not be that to my daughters.
That was profound. I'm going to read a passage from your book.
Yeah.
Chapter 6, you call it Free Your Masterpiece. I meet a lot of people who plot their days and sometimes much of their lives around compensating for their shortcomings and imperfections. Some lack self-esteem, so they deflect attention at any cost. Others, also ironically lacking self-esteem, overcompensate by cultivating giant egos. Some aggressively manage employees to keep scrutiny from themselves. Some shy away from leadership, worried it will expose what they don't know or can't do. And many, most even, choose to keep their lives and aspirations in narrow lanes because they're so sure they couldn't be successful anywhere else. This chapter opens with the question, is your life's plot about embracing possibilities or bearing flaws? Speak to that.
Yeah, I even hearing you read that, something I wrote, it still it still gets me.
Oh, it's the whole book. So for our leaders and listeners, while Chad's gathering his thought here, this is the whole book. The whole book is like the kind of book you read 1.5 pages and you put it down and you go and think about it. It will take you a year to finish this book if you read this book properly, because you've got these phenomenal passages that are really heartfelt and very, very resonant with a broad group. And so I want you just to think for a moment about why are we so obsessed and focused on our weaknesses and shoring up our deficiencies when, a man of faith, as you and I both are, we know we have so many talents that we're so fearful of igniting. Take this anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer this in a couple ways, and I think one, there's a great passage, a great quote by Marianne Williamson that says, it is not a light, it is not a darkness that scares us; it's our light that scares us. It's like, who am I to be beautiful, fabulous? So like we are so programmed not to believe that our qualities are what define us, and that we're so fixated on these negative things. And I think the reality is that we're brought up in a society that says, if I love myself, that's ego. Well, ego stands for edging God out. It's not about God, it's about me. And I think one of the main realities in this world is that when you allow yourself to shine, when you don't play small, when you allow your greatness to shine, it liberates others to do the same thing. And I think part of it is that we're born great. And again, this is my faith that tells me this as much as anything else, is that we have the DNA of greatness within us. But here's what happens. There's a story in the book. I went and saw the statue of the David in Florence with my wife. And I was listening to this docent tell this story. And she talked about how Michelangelo created this sculpture. And I'll shorten the version of it, but basically, they unveil this statue, and everybody's in awe of this statue of David. And if you've never seen it or been to it, it is unbelievable to stand in front of this sculpture. And this little girl pulled at Michelangelo's cloth and said, hey, how did you create something so beautiful out of a piece of rock? And he said, I didn't. It was there all along. I just chipped away the edges. And for me, when I heard that, I'm standing in this museum, I'm bawling, crying, and I realized this was my life, that I was born great. I was born with all these amazing qualities and amazing attributes and amazing things to contribute to the world. But what happened was I started telling myself bad stories. I didn't have a father, so that put some rock on. I was uneducated, so that put some rock on. I'm too tall, so that put some rock on. I was too skinny, so that put some rock on. I had bad teeth, put rock on. I had big hands, put rock on. I had bad relationships. I made a mistake. And all of a sudden, all these narratives just start putting rock on you. And you go away from this true essence of who you were born and how you were born and the DNA of greatness in you. And you get so fixated on all this rock that you can no longer move, like you're encapsulated in this rock, that everything feels heavy. But then you meet somebody, or you read something, or you're around somebody, or you listen to your podcast of the amazing guests you have on, and you're inspired to start chipping away the rock. And so you start chipping away the rock, and you start to feel free. And what that means is you stop living by these narratives of victimhood. And so you don't become great, you return to greatness. And for me, that was the theme of my life. It was like every piece of like negative thoughts, every time I had a bad relationship or a bad mistake, and it just made me feel so much heavier, so much weight of the world on me. I couldn't move. And I think part of it is we have to realize that we're born great. And you're not defined by the highs, you're defined by what you do in those low moments. Are you going to still believe in yourself when things go wrong? Are you still going to believe that you're worthy of love and respect? When you asked me to be on the podcast and this got all worked out, I sat in my office. And your podcast is one of the longest running podcasts. It's one of the best podcasts. I went through your entire guest list. I listened to so many of your episodes. They're heavy hitter after heavy hitter after heavy hitter. And I'm sitting in my office on the day I found out that I was going to be on the podcast. And I'm getting emotional. I'm like, how did I get here? And part of me wanted to say, well, I can't go on. I actually thought about not coming on the podcast. I was like, I'm gonna make a fool of myself. I don't belong in that podcast. And that's the critic inside of you trying to hold on to this narrative that you're not enough. And even in that moment, you have to create this narrative that says, no, listen, I'm worthy of sitting across from Scott Miller and having a conversation. I have something to contribute. And there is no room in which you do not belong. And I think the challenge is that most people just don't believe in themselves enough. And I think when you start chipping away the rock, the opportunities are endless. You'll start seeing them everywhere.
How do you hope people read your book? I shared with you how I'm reading it, kind of, in bite-sized bits.
Yeah.
Do you have honestly, as an author, you've envisioned book clubs, you've envisioned C-suite leaders, you've envisioned orientation programs in companies. What are your dreams for how this book will be received and how people will read it, absorb it, and apply it?
Yeah. So thanks for that question. I think first, I wrote the book that I needed the most in my life. And the reality is I wrote it as this not a how-to manual, but a thing that really just makes you think. And I think you said it right. I think it's the kind of book. Somebody said to me last night, or 2 nights ago, I was in Southern California, and I was giving a talk, and somebody came up and they said, I read your book, and I got to tell you, it's the hardest book. I've read 1,000 books. It's the hardest book I've ever read. And I first was like, whoa, tell me more. Like, it was hard, like you're reading a Jordan Peterson book. Like, it's like the verbiage is hard, and he's like, no, it's very easily written. He said, but the problem is every time I get to a couple pages, the way you wrote it, I see myself in the story. I see myself in the things, and then I start questioning it, and it puts me in this state of, like, sometimes I was angry, sometimes I was upset, sometimes I was crying. And I said, the goal of the book was that when you read it, it elicited an emotion. I said, I don't care what emotion it was. I don't care if you read the book and get pissed off. I don't care if you read the book and get happy, if you're sad. I don't care. The only emotion I was guarding against is that when you read the book and you started asking yourself questions, that you were indifferent. Because for every indifferent reader that reads my book, I have failed them. But if you read the book and then elicits emotions are meant to modify behaviors. There's something there. And for me, I wanted to modify emotion. I wanted to evoke emotions. And when you have that emotions, I want you to question the emotion. Because I think on the other side of that questioning is an answer that can redirect your life. And it can either redirect your life to create a new narrative, or it can give you more appreciation for what you currently have. But to me, I want this book to be an emotional book that guides you towards questioning things so that you can have a better life.
To say I am wrestling with Jordan Peterson's most recent book, We Who Wrestle with God, is an understatement, right?
Right. I have this book. That book is going to take me 7 years.
I know. You and I need a book club. You and I need a book club just for support, right, on this book. Okay.
Wait, what are you saying here?
What are you saying? How do you know this? How do you know this information, right? Listen, I'm going to give you some advice. I want you to go do 500 podcasts. I think you need to be on every podcast that will take you big or small. I don't care how many subscribers, because my friend, you are going to touch lives that you will never know about. Your Amazon reviews, your Amazon ranking, your bestseller, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. Do not check your ranking on any book list, because you are going to touch lives that you will never know about. Keep writing, keep speaking, keep interviewing. Today, our guest was Chad Sanschagrin. His book is Keep Telling Yourself, Shift Your Story, and Create a Life of Abundance. Chad, thank you for your time today.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's a cannonball moment for me.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.